Yeah.
Go ahead, do the intro.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to The Ethical Algorithm, our podcast show where we talk about AI, ethics, and algorithms. I'm your host, Gavin Klondike, and my co-host...
Thank you, Elio Grieco.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about a couple things that have been top of mind. We've been talking to some people after our first release of our podcast episode, and so we're just going to kind of run down the list. So the first thing that comes up as a topic of concern, Elio and I, we were at what would you call that? Like a conference, a training on Thursday?
Yeah, we got called in, emergency panel. We did a panel on AI at ISSA, which is a national security group.
Yeah, so we were talking to a lot of directors, VPs, C-levels in the security fields, really trying to understand how AI can impact their business. And so one of the things that somebody brought up that I thought was really good that we should talk about is legal concerns. Are images or videos created by AI copyrightable?
So right now, and again, there's not much precedent, so they're still working on this, but right now, as far as the law, I think there's one case and then one more or two more ongoing. Mm-hmm. It has to be created by a human to be copyrighted. There was that famous case with the monkey where the photographer, I forget which country, he lost his camera. The monkey grabbed the camera, took a picture of itself, and it went viral. And this is like the most popular picture I would say he's ever taken, but he didn't take it. And so he was fighting really hard to have this, copyright so he could make money off this picture and get paid every time some news station ran it. And they took it to court, and the judge is like, sorry, it's not your picture, it's the monkey's picture. And the law doesn't give the monkey copyright of the picture. So there's a recent ruling that came down, I forget which court. So far, they have held that, no, you cannot copyright anything generated by AI.
Yeah, which is really fascinating for me because the crypto craze, when that was happening, all the NFTs were made with AI, which means if you bought an NFT and the value became worthless, it's even worth less today.
I take issue with became.
I mean, look.
But that's one more reason they were never worth anything right there.
All value is just what somebody's willing to pay for it. So if somebody's willing to buy a Bored Ape NFT for $200,000, that's on them. I'm not going to tell you how to spend your money. But
if you think someone else is going to buy it from you, though, that's the luck.
Now I can just make that. I can make it my own NFT and then sell that and just call it a Bored Ape NFT. Like, there's no copyright here. There's no restriction. And that's something that I find, deeply fascinating, especially when it comes to a lot of this AI and tech. The other thing that I find really fascinating is that the things that we're concerned about as far as, new precedent when it comes to AI comes from stuff that we've already experienced in the past, right? So you gave up a really good monkey example, right? Mm-hmm. We've had a situation where there was a piece of art created by a non-human. How do we consider that legally? And so now we have new art generation created by non-humans, and we kind of have an idea of how to consider that. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of back and forth in court, so it's going to be really exciting to see what's going to happen in the next 5 years. But that's where we're at.
I want to tangent briefly to a related conversation that I've had with some artists and other creative friends on LinkedIn and a little bit in person. Mm-hmm. So since we're talking about this, can AI be creative?
Depends on what you mean by that. It's a very philosophical question.
I have a specific definition, but I was curious.
Yeah, what's your definition?
Okay.
Just so that we have a start.
Okay, I'll go first. I was going to see what you said. So my definition of creativity is it is entropy filtered through, taste through your experience. Because every artist I know, I have family members who are artists, quite a few. I'm like the technical guy. Everyone else is an artist. And I have a lot of friends who are famous artists, and especially in the Native American community, and they're always playing, they're always trying stuff, right? My uncle, who is prolific in all different media, he was always just trying stuff. He would move around these 1,000+ pound sculptures in his backyard just to see if it looked better with that one over there and that one over there, like ridiculously strong man. And just playing all the time. Like he had extra paint. He just painted this huge Father Wind thing on his wall. Right. And so not all of it becomes a piece that everyone's proud of that gets sold or gets displayed. Yeah. So there's this constant just creating, just trying stuff and just filtering and refining. And one of the best was Sandra Coho. I loved her quote from way back. She had her little, I think it was her niece asked her, "Why do you paint?" Yeah. And she said, "Well, I get ideas stuck in here, and I have to get them out of my head. I can't concentrate until I get the idea out of my head and onto canvas, and then I can think clearly again." So creativity, I think there's a big distinction to be drawn between art which I define as that's a form of communication, right? There has to be a human behind art.
Okay.
Because I'm communicating something. A bit abstractly, there's a lot of room for interpretation depending on the piece, but I'm communicating something I feel is important that other humans should know. But that's separate from creativity. It usually involves creativity, but creativity is just tons of stuff and then filter that through your experience as an artist to create art.
I see. No, I'm glad that you gave that example, because there's a lot of things that are kind of swirling around in my brain right now, and the first thing that comes to mind is the difference between process dependent or outcome dependent, because it sounds like the distinction for you is if you're just creating art for being to be sold, right, and you're mass marketing or you're doing silk screening like pop art, for example, like Andy Warhol, and you're just creating art for that, then it sounds like that's not creation by that definition. It sounds more like it's the process of creating the art, which, again, like you can go into art history with Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
Because I also think of the opposite, right? Like Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock paintings, I was really curious because Jackson Pollock paintings, it looks like a baby threw up on a canvas. I'm not kidding.
To be charitable.
And I mean, he'll glue stuff onto his canvas before he does that. He'll just splash paint, and you look at it, and it's like, I could do that. I could do that when I'm drunk. Like, that's easy. But what was really interesting when I started actually researching Jackson Pollock, the reason why his paintings sell for millions of dollars is because there's actually two ways that you can analyze art. So the first is content. Content is there's a picture of a sailboat or a puppy dog. And then there's composition. How was it made? And so when you look for content in Jackson Pollock art, there's absolutely nothing. It's hot garbage. But when you look at the composition, the story behind the art, that's what really ties in. The story is really interesting. So Jackson Pollock, he would glue a bunch of stuff onto his canvas, candy bars, wrappers, things like that, coins, and then he would listen to jazz as he just splashed paint onto the canvas. At the time, this was a visual representation, almost like a byproduct. Like, this is the waste product of the process itself, where the art's not important. How the art was created is what was important.
Yeah.
And so it was such a visceral expression of freedom, to the point, here's the plot twist, the CIA used Jackson Pollock art as anti-Soviet propaganda in Soviet Russia during the Cold War.
Interesting. I'm trying to think. Go on. Explain. Explain.
No, that's the story. That's why his stuff sells for millions of dollars. There is more to art than just the output, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you can have art that is just the byproduct. I'm a huge fan of like the idea of a byproduct. Like sometimes people think we're here for a reason, and all the focus is on us. There's so many unique things about human beings as a whole. And part of me just kind of thinks, well, what if we're just the byproduct of something bigger, right? You look at gasoline, and diesel. Diesel's just a byproduct. It's a waste product of refining gasoline. But now we can use that as gasoline, and it becomes very useful. So you can imagine, personify like diesel gas for a second. Like, oh, I have a purpose. I was built specifically for a reason. It's like,
yeah, because we're trying to get the other thing.
Sure, right. We're trying to get the other thing. So it's just
awful,
like
anyway.
And that's not like what I actually think. It's just really interesting from like a philosophical perspective to like dig down into. And so when you're talking about can AI create, I think the answer is yes, even by your definition. Because even though it's going through a completely separate process, or it's not doing a lot of the trial and error, it's not expressing anything, what it is doing is taking in its past understandings of the world and its surroundings and then reinterpreting it in such a way that it can create something new out of that.
Yeah, I would agree. So, like I said, can AI create art?
Yeah.
No. I think it cannot, because it can't communicate. There's no intention. There's no will there.
Yeah.
Can it be creative? Yes, very, very much so, because it's unconstrained by anything, really, the patterns it found in the corpus it was trained on. So I think that AI can be incredibly creative, but it can't ever create art. It's my personal view.
Have you heard of, because now we're going to start digging into a little bit of postmodern philosophy. Have you heard of noise music?
I've heard of microtonal, but no, I have not. And I've heard of glitch step and all that, but not noise music.
So thinking, Plato, kind of very Platonic philosophy, at what point does noise become music? And so there was a lot of musicians that kind of started to run with this idea of like,
Yeah.
oh, well, some people have this mindset that it has to have a rhythm, it has to have melody. And then it turns out we have examples of music that don't have a rhythm or melody or both. And so at what point does noise stop becoming music, or to put it the other way around, at what point does music stop becoming, at what point does music start becoming noise?
Yeah.
And so that's the concept of noise music. The idea is to try and get as far away from any music representation. Make noise, but it can't be rhythmic, it can't have melody, it can't repeat itself. And so if you're looking at, and that's creativity, right? That's creativity by your definition. And so when you're looking at, can AI be creative in this aspect, at what point does the random entropy in AI itself stop becoming art or stop becoming creative and start becoming something else, whatever that something else may be? So that's a really interesting philosophical question.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. I have to explore that one a little bit more. There's too many other tangents. I'm like, no, let's not go off on those now. But I think it's interesting to bring that in, just the can it be creative, can it be art? Because I think as we move forward and there are more legal cases kind of testing these waters of what can be copyrighted, I don't know, at some point, how will we change the definition? Will it just be, nope, a human has to make it? Will it just always stay that?
Right.
Or will there be some measure of creativity? And in which case, it's like the famous Supreme Court thing, about pornography. How do you know it's porn? Well, I know it when I see it, right?
I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah, so like, do you run into the same thing, kind of what you're saying about the music? When does it cross over from being creative to just, and I've heard a lot of people who don't have art history backgrounds, and neither do I, and they're like, that's not art, that's garbage, right?
To be fair, neither do I. I just get really fascinated.
So already a lively debate, but it's going to be interesting to see. I do think we're going to see really interesting stuff, and I think there's, to kind of close this out, I think there's a trend where, anytime we make a technology that makes stuff easier, there's always a resistance, because you have, right, when photography came out, you had painters, and a lot of the painting back then, there was no way to get a picture other than by just painting it or drawing it or carving it. Right. So realism was the target for like everyone, because that was the only way to make it. And then suddenly you had photography, and there's this way faster way of just like, hey, take this silvered paper, expose it to light. Oh, look, we got a picture. That didn't take that long. I mean, way longer than today. And as it's gotten easier and easier, and we've gone from film to digital, it got even faster. And now, I was just looking at, was it Real Phil? Have you seen the new thing just dropped this week?
No.
So it's context aware.
Okay.
So you can take a scene of us talking, for instance, and if part of this got obscured, you can take other pictures from other angles. You don't have to have the same lighting. Like, one can be at night. Doesn't even have to be at the same time of day. Yeah. And it can basically do content aware fill. And so you can do in or out painting, which is extremely accurate. And it's not just guessing, it's actually using the other reference points, maybe just 2 or 3, not even a ton, to fill in what was obscured. So like you get photobombed by a bird if you're like on a on a skyscraper, you're taking a picture of some monument, and this bird, you got this blurry patch right through the middle. Yeah. You can take other stuff, even off Wikipedia and whatever, and you can go ahead and you can say, hey, just get that blurry bird out of there, give me the picture as if it was taken really, really, taken properly without any interference. So it's going to be really interesting to see, as getting a really good shot takes less and less skill, which already, we joke about statistical photography, where you just take since you can get a card that'll hold like thousands of images, instead of one shot, you just take 20. One of them's going to be good. Just put on burst, put on bracketing.
Yeah, that's my go-to move. I'm really bad at photography.
So it'll be really interesting when getting the look you want involves taking 1 or 2 pictures, and then just, even a child, like even someone who's like 6 or 8 can be like, oh no, make it look a little more like this. Make it look darker. Make them look a little more angry or happier, right? Yeah. And can make an image that photorealistically is on par with someone who's taken years and years of training, technically anyway, right? And looks just as good technically as someone who's spent $250,000 going to Pratt or some, like RISD or something. So it's going to be interesting to see where this all lands. And
so that kind of brings us to our next topic, deepfakes, and more specifically, deepfake scams. We're starting to hear more in the news where a scammer calls my mom with my cloned voice, right? They picked up stuff off my TikTok, my Instagram, or my YouTube channel. They were able to clone my voice, and then they call my mom and say, hey, we have your son. He's for ransom. Here's his voice. Hey, Mom, I need help. Give them the money.
Yeah.
What do we do about that?
I mean, there's the answer, and we're probably not going to do that because we put that off for decades. Right. So the answer is we need identity. What I call the original sin of the internet. The internet, we kind of put it out there, and this is where, again, all these people just vaguely tangent. They're like, oh, Bitcoin and blockchain is going to be the next internet. No, it's not. The internet was put out there way before it was finished. Right. And it was immediately useful, and it kind of snuck out. And so there's all these unfinished bits of, like, there is no identity protocol. You don't know who you're talking to. We have TLS and SSL, right? And they kind of work, but not very well. Yeah. And so you need identity. Like, this is what Phil Zimmerman worked on in the 90s. I wish we had that book out here. But you need a way cryptographically. We have all the cryptography. Right. And don't listen to the people who are like, oh, quantum is going to break every... No, it's not. We already have post-quantum stuff. No one's built a big enough quantum computer to actually attack keys. Yet,
it's all theoretical.
And we already have what protects against that. Like, it's not that big a deal. By the time there is an actual threat, like a real threat, maybe there's some nation state that's got a 4,000-bit quantum computer hidden away somewhere to work. They're using that to crack, like, very, very high-profile head of state stuff. But other than that, it's not a real threat. And by the time it will be a real threat, most of us are moving on and already doubling key sizes and moving to quantum-resistant ciphers. Anyway, we have it. We have the crypto. Yeah. We need to use it. We need a full web of trust so that when I meet, right, I can exchange keys with you. And we have NFC now, which is a great way. It's not like that's a very quick aside. NFC is a lot harder to snoop on than it's not normal radio transmissions. It's a different effect.
You can't snoop on NFC with like a flipper zero?
No.
Okay.
No. NFC, so RFID, powerful antenna, trivial, just get a big, powerful high gain antenna and you can listen from far away. But the way NFC works, there are ways to do it, and I don't know all the details, but if you have the NSA's budget, yes, you can probably listen in on NFC stuff from a distance, but it requires extremely specialized equipment and antennas to do so. So we have QR codes, we have NFC, it's not that hard, and you see, like, Signal is finally doing this now. I remember asking Brian Sambaden years, like 20 years ago, could we use, like, QR codes? And, like, there was almost no QR code stuff in America back then. It was very larval. Could we use those to exchange crypto keys? Because, like, you could put 4 kilobytes in there. That's decent, right? Yeah. And so now we're seeing that with Signal. Now we're seeing that with Keybase, with SyncThing. There's a whole bunch of software.
Yeah. It reminds me of the old PGP parties where you would have your public and private key, and you would just hand out your public key at these PGP parties so that people can do secure email for you.
So this is destroying. We've always just used, what do you sound like? Like right now, this is as good as it gets from authentication.
Oh,
yeah.
Banks have used that.
Right?
Where we can tell by your voice that you are who you say you are, so you're authorized. And so if I can deep fake a voice and it has a high enough fidelity that it can actually fool one of those systems, then that's
and it's not if you can, it's if you want to.
Right.
And you can afford it. Like, a lot of these technologies, Lyrebird was, what, 3-4 years ago debuted? Was pretty impressive?
Lyrebird became Descript, and now it's 7 Labs.
Okay.
7 Labs is kind of the
new thing. And I've heard some of the new ones take only 30 seconds of video to train. And I don't know, I'm not up on the new stuff, maybe you are. Yeah. But I think, if I remember right, it has been like 4 or 5 years, Lyrebird was modeling the actual, like, the shape of the vocal cords. So it should be pretty freaking accurate in terms of making the sounds sound just like you. So all the stuff we use when we're in person, right? I can see how you're holding yourself, how you're moving, right? We've met a number of other times. It would be really hard for someone to fool me and pretend to be you sitting this far away.
But it's not about fooling you or me. It's about fooling, everybody else. It's just like any other form of social engineering, right? Like, they'll fool my grandmother. They'll fool my mother. They might fool me if they catch me on, like, a bad time or a bad mood. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of the thing, because when we're looking at scammers and phishers and any of those people, what they do is they tend to cast a wide net. And so they're not trying to catch everyone. They don't have to catch everyone. That's why when you get, like, a spam email, right, there's misspellings or the grammar is really bad, because what that does is actually pre-select. Like, if you and I are the kind of person that would focus on misspellings, bad grammar, and be like, that's a phishing email, we're not their target.
do
right?
the needful.
We're not the kind of person that's going to fall for that, right?
Not going to do the needful. Have you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar
That's
with
a
that.
common saying that a lot of, if you worked with, H-1B people, with phenomenal programmers at Amazon, a lot of Indian programmers, and that is just a phrase that you'll hear a lot in English spoken by people from India.
Okay.
That you almost never hear anyone else say.
Yeah.
Americans don't say do the needful. So that's like a dead giveaway. This is someone from India.
I see.
When you see that in, like, I've gotten several spam emails. I'm like, yes, no, of course you're my good friend from Pennsylvania.
Right, right.
But there's little tells like that. And what I'm getting at is in person, right, it's very hard to impersonate, and the cost is too high to go impersonate, to go pretend to be all these people and put on wigs and change facial makeup and all this, right? The threat economics don't work. And what AI is doing with Lyrebird, with all these deep fake things, it's pulling away, since we don't have proper authentication, because we just have never decided to roll out a proper identity protocol based on cryptography at a wide scale, it's taking that away from us. Because when you're online, you don't have all these channels of what does the person smell like? How do they hold their body? What do they sound like? You're like, there's all these channels you can use, all these little things that whether you pick up on the micro expressions and all that consciously because you were trained, or like most people, just subconsciously, right? Oh, he's kind of creepy, right?
I think some people would just kind of have a knee-jerk reaction of getting on like any sort of registry.
See, this is a whole nother thing. We should do a separate podcast, so I'll keep this real short. But web of trust. If you make it a fully decentralized, the old term used to be self-sovereign, which just means you roll your own keys.
Yeah.
You don't have to say, hey, Apple, hey, Google, can I please have an identity crypto key?
Right.
You're just like, hey, phone, device, whatever. Like, go ahead, crunch some numbers, let me know when the key's ready. Right.
But there's still, like, there's something to be said about anonymity on the internet, right? Like, we look at systems like, I mean, like it or not, 4chan, Reddit is a really big one where people want to stay anonymous on the internet. And so when you start registering any sort of identity or any sort of consistent identity, then you lose that anonymity. Now, again, there are some people that would like the ability to have that opportunity to register and have their identity so that their stuff is secure. They know when somebody comes across their stuff, they know it was made by them, right? Non-repudiation, proper encryption.
We should define that for people who might not know what non-repudiation is.
So non-repudiation is basically, I sent you a letter. I can't say I did not send you that letter, right? Like, oh, that was somebody else. It wasn't me, right?
Yeah.
I didn't Shaggy. It wasn't me. So non-repudiation, what it does is allow you to essentially sign that letter in such a way that if somebody receives that letter, they know that it was you. You cannot take that back and say, no, it wasn't me. Somebody forged my signature.
Yeah.
So that's non-repudiation.
It's a really important aspect of cryptography.
Well, I mean, that's what we use in contracts. Like in, the real world. I keep trying not to say meat space. So I'm going to say it once just so I get it out of my system. I love the old, like, cyberpunk lingo. You know what I mean? So in the real world, where we go outside and we touch grass, like we all do.
That still exists?
Yeah.
How many kids do that?
It's all artificial.
These old guys.
Right. No, but when we look at parallels in the real world, right? Because I see a lot of this technology, even the internet, even some of the new emerging technologies that are coming out today, like AI, I see a lot of parallels to things that we've had to deal with in the past. And so as we continue to learn from how we've dealt with some of these things in the past, we can use technology and computer systems to kind of augment or speed that up. Now, that also means, like, any issues that we have in our society or with ourselves, like, are also turned up to 11. So you just become wrong faster.
There's a great cartoon about that. But these should be considered accelerants.
Yes.
And the thing that a lot of people don't realize, there's actually, I think it's a Soviet saying, quantity has a quality all its own. Mm-hmm. And when you look at threat dynamics in systems, speeding things up drastically changes the threat dynamics and economics. Now, one thing, I've seen these other podcasts do these great little short cold takes. So here's my cold take. You're talking about anonymity online.
Right.
I have had many conversations over decades on anonymity and identity and all this. I don't think anonymity is that useful.
Okay.
Right, there we go. I think that pseudonymity is useful and gives you all the benefits of anonymity, because the true benefits of anonymity is that it's not linkable. It's unlinkability with your real identity. And pseudonymity allows trust building without linkability, unless you get linked, which is getting easier and easier these days with correlational attacks. But that's the true value, is to not have it linked to your normal identity. Because with anonymity, there's very low value, right? If you look at forums, even dark web stuff, if you don't know who it is at all, time and time again, there's very low value in that. There's no incentive not to just say ridiculous stuff, and you can't build any trust and start trusting what any entity's saying.
For those listening in, can you give us an example of each? What does anonymity look like, and then what does pseudonymity look like?
So anonymity is just unlinkable, right? And this is why when people say like Bitcoin is anonymous. No, it's not. You cannot build an anonymous payment system. Well, that's not entirely true. A slot machine is an anonymous payment system. Pull lever, maybe you get money, maybe you don't. It randomly decides. It doesn't care who you are. It just pays eventually, right? Randomly. That's an anonymous payment system. Not very useful. I mean, I guess casinos would argue otherwise, but
I was going to say,
as a practical payment system, if you don't know where the money's going, I had one guy, he's like, I'm going to build a distributed anonymous payment system for donations. But I'm like, wait, if you're just throwing money out there, did you just donate to the Save the Puppies and Kittens Fund or the Global Euthanasia for Animals Fund?
So then what
right? You're going to want to know where it's going.
Yeah. So what would pseudonymity look like?
What all these systems actually are is pseudonymous. You have a pseudonym, or we call a pen name, and that pseudonym, in the case of cryptocurrencies, it's your key, right? The wallet is just your cryptographic key.
Bitcoin wallet.
And I would just say, just like the regular internet, except again, we don't have an identity protocol yet. People using PGP or GPG, right? Yeah. They have an identity and they've built a web of trust, but no one else really does. And so your identity is this weird fragmented mess of all these little fragments on Facebook and Google and all these other cloud platforms. Right. But it really should be one thing. And you could, if you want, have multiple that are unlinked. And there's a lot of value in having a pseudonym, especially if you're in marginalized groups, right? And you're saying stuff, whether it's LGBTQ, et cetera, whether it's, what's the thing going on, the row with Canada right now in India, because they assassinated a Sikh, right? Like, and they're like, if you say the wrong thing, it can be very costly in certain areas. So there's a lot of value to be able to put out information and not have it linked to your real identity so people can find and make you go away permanently. And I think you get all of that with a pseudonym. If you can preserve unlinkability, which is getting harder all the time, that's the value. Anonymity has very low value. Unlinkability has very high value. That's what people actually want, but they just don't really study these terms deeply enough to understand that unlinkability is key, not anonymity.
I think you're right. I think that this would be better as a separate podcast topic because the thing that I kind of go into as far as the differences between those, because I think a lot of people would use those kind of like synonymously, like they would use them as the same
and they're not.
thing. Right. And I imagine something along the lines of, I don't want, the government to know what I'm doing online versus I don't want the government to associate what my online identity is and link that to me. And so you can look at something like Twitter, where people will have like pseudonyms. Again, Reddit is another one where people will have pseudonames. I don't want my company knowing what I say online, kind of thing. So I see a number of people that would kind of like link those two things together. I also see a lot of people that are kind of getting away with being those pseudo-anonymous, especially when it came to the crypto scams that we saw a lot of like in the last 2 years. Yeah. So it's definitely an interesting discussion worth having down the line.
And it ties back in, though, to AI, because there was a case going back to non-repudiation. Yeah. I forget which country this was. I don't believe it was U.S. I think it was somewhere in Europe. Was it Spain? Anyway, there was a case very recently, within the last week or two, where this stuff has become so accessible that there are kids, in I believe high school, trading naked pictures of their female classmates. And they were never naked. There were never pictures taken of them unclothed.
Yeah, that gets into.
And so that goes back to
I'm really worried about.
Repudiation, right? Like, did you take this picture? No, I never took that picture of myself.
Right.
And so having that ability to deny, to repudiate, and say no, that was a generated picture. Like, it's getting really interesting because it's so convincing. The deep fakes, the imagery, and all that. Right. It's not enough anymore to just say, oh, that sounds like the right person or it looks like the right person. At some point, we will have to have a proper identity protocol. And the last thing I'll say about that on this podcast is, no, like, we don't want that centralized, right? You don't like Elon Musk just yanked that guy had a Twitter handle that he wanted. It was like X or whatever. He just took it, right?
Right.
You really, 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 we've already seen a lot of ownership transfer attacks where one person owned this thing and they were trustworthy, and then suddenly someone else just took it, and now they're not trustworthy in the software supply chain, among other places. So there are ways to do identity that are fully distributed. Chris Allen, anyone wanting to learn more, look up Chris Allen, look up Rebooting the Web of Trust. I think there's 10 or 11 Git repos from every single working group with just tons of really good stuff in there if you really want to figure this stuff out and learn what it means. But we're going to have to confront this. We've gotten away with just pretending we don't need a real identity protocol on the internet, or we could do a centralized one or farm it out to other orgs. They all have serious problems. We need a fully decentralized. You create your own key. You set up your own web of trust. The only people that need to know it's you are within your little community. There's a term I'm calling knowledge horizons. So you don't want the whole world to know. This is, again, another problem with blockchain. Right. I don't want everyone knowing that's me. Yeah. I only want, if I'm buying something from you, right, if it's just some, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something trivial. I don't really
Let's
need...
sell drugs. Let's just sell drugs.
I was going to say, like, artwork or something, but sure, okay, let's do drugs.
All right. First off, student loans are expensive. I need to make money somehow. Let's sell drugs. Let's go Breaking Bad on this.
Okay, so you don't want to get, like, really dark and criminal. You're not like Merck and Pfizer.
No,
just like Breaking Bad.
Being a clown, honestly.
But anyway, like, we don't need the whole world to know that I bought this from you. I need to know. You need to know. We need to agree that I got what I bought from you and you got your money. And then maybe if something goes wrong, then drugs is a little harder, right? But maybe we need to bring in the legal system and prove to them what happened and make it right. But we don't ever need the whole world to know. This is what I always found so ridiculous about Bitcoin, right?
Well, real briefly, I mean, it kind of almost sounds like an identity escrow, because when you look at something like an escrow service, right?
Yeah.
You're buying a house, for example. You need to know that the funds are there. Now, I can show you my bank statements and say, hey, the funds are there, but you need to know that the funds are there, but in a secure location. And it's not something that everybody else needs to know. It's just something between our parties as part of that transaction. Yeah. When I was trolling around on the deep web, I saw quite a few of those services that were Bitcoin escrow services, right?
Yeah.
You're anonymous, I'm anonymous, we don't know each other. I don't even know if you have the funds, but I need to have a trusted third party. So I can definitely see like some of that popping up a little bit in the future.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to shift gears a little bit to kind of our next topic, which is essentially when that identity goes awry, right? So let's talk about misclassification, especially when it comes to AI systems, right? I had a conversation with a CISO, and he was worried about, hey, I have this picture of a dog, and it's sitting next to a fence, and there's a shadow cast over this fence. And so when you throw it into basically Amazon's like image classification, and you throw it up on Google Drive, and it says, oh, this is clearly a tiger. Notice the stripes. And it's like, it's not, though. What do you think is going on there?
There's so many places to go with this, and I wish I had it handy. There's a great picture of this person holding a little dog, not a Chihuahua, a little bigger than that. I don't remember the breed. And they've put a bottle cap on its head, and they've taken a 2-liter Coke wrapper and wrapped it around the dog. And it's like classified like Coke bottle. It's like, no, it's dog. But yeah, like I think fundamentally all these things are pattern matching, as you know well, right? They see patterns and they match patterns. And I know something we've talked about in the past is giraffing, right? Where you have overrepresentation of interesting stuff in the data set. That's just, there's not a lot of giraffes in America unless you're talking in a zoo. But because giraffes are really interesting. They're a really crazy looking animal. Big long legs, big long neck.
Yeah, I'm convinced they're aliens.
Yeah.
They're an octopus.
And they got a pressure suit in their legs and all that, right? Yeah. So we have a lot of pictures of giraffes. Yeah. And so you have all this misclassification. And I think, to me, the more terrifying thing is, of course this is going to happen. People do this all the time, right? Yeah. You'll be driving and you see like a bag in the road just floating, and you don't always classify it as just, a floating plastic bag, especially if it's dark. You might be like, try to swerve and not hit it, and you're like, it's a plastic bag. I didn't need to swerve and endanger anyone. So it's a problem of perception. But I think where it gets interesting is when we start using these judgments that are just as flawed, maybe more flawed than human judgments. That's when it gets interesting.
Well, to kind of get everybody on the same page in regards to like what giraffing is. So there is a weird phenomenon where you can take pictures of just empty space, right? Here's a tree, here's a field, and you throw it up onto these AI systems, and it'll say, oh, this is clearly a giraffe in the picture. And it's like, there's no animal in the picture at all. What are you talking about? There's no long neck thing with spots, and it's obviously a giraffe. And so that's giraffing. It's a phenomenon that we're noticing in image recognition systems. There's other AI systems that have their own little form of giraffing. And as we're trying to integrate AI into more and more of our systems and use them and rely on them every day, we're realizing that there are some limitations. And so, as you know, the curious nerds that we are, it's always fun to poke and prod and see like what those limitations are.
And it's funny until it's deadly, right? And you look at, remember the early thing they did where they modified just with 2 pieces of tape a speed limits, or no, it was a stop sign.
That one, I have some notes on that.
Okay, go right ahead.
The inside scoop.
You got or if you got a fresher example too.
Yeah. So,
it's an old one.
So the inside scoop is, the headline is, you can modify a stop sign so that a self-driving car won't actually stop at the stop sign. The idea is that if you modify the stop sign with enough tape, then image recognition system won't identify that this is a stop sign. The problem with that research, and there's been other research out there kind of along those same lines that have basically refuted that premise, because the way that image recognition systems work, especially like deep learning convolutional neural networks, is they look at certain features. So if you look at a convolutional neural network, at the first few layers, you're going to see like lines and curves and angles. You go a couple layers deeper, you're going to start to see some basic shapes like squares, circles, and triangles. You go a few lines deeper, you're going to see, here's red with like a white border. Here's something that's kind of curved that looks like an S. And so you combine enough of those features together and you get, oh, that's a stop sign. So when you start putting tape over it, like, yeah, you're covering some of these features and you're introducing new features at the same time, but it's not enough to strongly influence not just that model, but other models. So there's this concept in machine learning called attack transferability. So the idea is that you have multiple different models. It doesn't even matter how they're made, right? Like one can be different algorithms, logistic regression, random forest, convolutional neural networks. And so an attack that'll target one will be able to target all of them. That's attack transferability. Some of these, where you're sticking tape onto things, do not have that property. It's a really brittle attack. So I can influence your algorithm, but the very next model that comes out, I'm not going to be able to influence in the same way. And so even when you look at the way that they were able to influence their models, like the models were really weak. So they weren't good models, they weren't robust, they would misclassify all the time in the first place. And then 2, if you just angle it slightly, the attack doesn't work anymore.
Okay. So let's put on our adversarial hat and say, instead of trying to modify a stop sign, what if we just obscure it? And
what would that look like?
I'll just throw something over it, put a branch in the way, just anything to hide it.
Okay.
Or just remove it completely, right?
Yeah.
Just pull the sign out of the ground.
Just pull the sign out of the ground.
Which is harder than, if they said it right, harder than it should be. But the problem there, and the reason I am super leery, I mean, Teslas are just, their system is garbage.
Right.
And I think Mercedes beat them to level 3 recently. Autonomous, that was the headline anyway.
Anybody can beat Tesla to level 3. It's not,
So
that gets into a lot of insider information. We have some hot takes on that,
but I guess my concern with any of these vehicles, whether it's Waymo, Mercedes, any of these Cruise, if you remove the sign, a human, right, has causality, and a human could say, "Whoa, wait a minute!" Like, based on the last few lights I came to, there was always a stop sign, and this is like a small rural part of town. So there's unlikely to be a stop light, but every last stop was a 4-way stop.
Right.
This is probably the same thing. And so even if the stop sign gets destroyed or removed or whatever, or obscured, they're probably going to still have that same mental model and say, I need to act the same way and check if there's cars, probably slow down, double check. Whereas if your only cue is, I see a stop sign or I see a light, and that's the only cue that's determining how I drive as a self-driving vehicle, that's very fragile. That's very brittle, like you were saying.
A couple things.
Okay.
So the first thing would be, when you're looking at computer science, a lot of it comes back to mathematics. And so the approach is, if we're going to create an adversarial model, then we need to have an idea of what a successful attack looks like. So the model that they have is, this has to be able to fool a machine learning system, but not fool a human. And so when you're talking about, there's supposed to be a stop light or a stop sign here, right? But I'm from out of town. I don't know what these roads look like.
That's
if anybody's
true.
ever
That's
driven
true.
in New Jersey or Philadelphia, you
DC.
realize it's very different than driving
Yeah.
in California. And
Yeah,
so if you're from
definitely.
California and you go to one of these places, like, you're not going to know some of the protocol. I actually, a little embarrassing
jug
story
handles?
about myself. I actually went the wrong way on a one-way road in New Jersey.
Oh.
Right. Because it wasn't clear that
Yeah.
this was a median. It was like a 6-way interchange, and it wasn't clear that there was a median. And I was supposed to not just go over 4 lanes, I had to go over 8 lanes. And that's how I got onto the right road. So I only went over 4 lanes because, that made sense.
Yeah.
And I wound up going the wrong way on a one-way road, which
That's
was
exciting.
terrifying because you read your driver's manual, right? You read your driver's manual and it says, okay, if anything goes wrong, just pull off to the right.
Yeah.
My right is your left. Where do I go? It was very confusing, very terrifying. I don't like driving in New Jersey, as you can tell.
Did you pop the e-brake?
No.
Turn yourself around?
I didn't do the Tokyo Drift style thing. But I managed to get off. I was safe. Nobody died. Nobody got hurt or anything like that. But that's the thing, right? And so if that's your barrier of entry, then yeah, it's going to be a little harder to clear. But it's also, some humans won't be able to clear that either. So when we're looking at, I have this fly like buzzing around my face right now.
Yeah, a little fruit fly.
So when we're looking at how we can fool self-driving cars instead of humans, we need to look at what's something that would fool a self-driving car but not a human. There was another set of researchers. What they decided to do was actually take some gaffer tape, and they covered a 35-mile-an-hour sign, and they just extended the middle part of the 3, so it looked like an 85-mile-an-hour sign.
Oh yeah.
Now, humans, you and I, right?
That would
we've driven for a
potentially,
while.
yeah.
And so we know that, all right, it's probably either a 75 or a 65. There is no 85-mile-an-hour sign.
Yeah.
But it did fool some of the humans. So that failed their adversary test, and that's why it wasn't considered a proper bug finding, simply because this is something that would fool a human.
So I guess that's important to talk about which category we're operating in.
Exactly.
Because there's the adversarial thing, but I guess my bigger concern with all this stuff is if we're not assuming adversarial, if we're just assuming a deficiency in the model.
And you keep using that word assume, because when we're talking again about computer science, we got to go back to mathematical principles. There's no assumptions. We're making precise statements, or even if there are assumptions, like cryptography. Cryptography follows precise assumptions. And so when we're making these assumptions, we need to be precise in those.
Yeah, because I haven't seen any models. I mean, I've seen very early research on causality.
Yeah.
But again, if I see a school zone, or like if I'm driving just down a small street, there's some little 2-lane streets like Osborne here in Arizona, right? And you see a house, and you see like a little tricycle, and you see stuff. Like as a human, you see stuff, a wading pool, a tricycle. You're like, oh, there's probably a young child that lives there. So if you're not an a-hole, right, if you're a conscientious driver, you're like, oh, okay, so I am on the lookout. If there's a ball, or now I'm going to drive just a little slower, have my foot ready on the brake just in case.
Yeah.
Because I have things that indicate there might be a child. There might be a reason to be a little more careful.
Right.
And I would be shocked if any of the self-driving platforms have anything like that yet.
Right, but you're also talking about, like, you need to have perfect sleep, you need to be, like, in a good mood, not disturbed in any way, not texting, not on the phone.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of nuance to even that.
Did you see I think it was Jalopnik, I believe, did the numbers.
I can't say I've seen that, but I have seen something that kind of reframed my whole idea, and I think that'll kind of help this conversation.
Okay.
Think of AI as your drunk friend. And so
I don't want my drunk friend driving.
Well, first off, I don't want my drunk friend driving either.
So that's a great way to think of it. Yeah.
But if we're going to put any sort of reliance on that, then we need to assume that the AI is not going to pick up certain things that you and I might pick up.
Oh, totally.
And again, there's humans that would fail this test as well.
Sure.
So we need to lower that barrier of entry, and then that's kind of the grounds that we play in.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea.
So, but that's the thing. There's this myth, and I forget, there's a woman on LinkedIn, and she had a fair amount of background, and even she was falling to this myth of like, these are, but there's so much, like, I think she was a former police officer or something, and she was talking about how bad people are at driving, but no one talking about precision. I believe it was Jalopnik did the numbers, and they actually didn't just look at how many accidents there are a year, but how many miles, as far as we can tell to the best data we have, how many miles do people drive a year, and therefore what percentage of those miles are accidents. And a lot of people are probably think, oh, it's a lot of them, right? There's accidents all the time because the news always, right? If it bleeds, it leads. So it's overrepresented, kind of like giraffing. And so when you do the actual numbers, it's like 5 trillion miles. It's huge numbers driven a year. And then the number of accident miles is a tiny fraction of that. And the actual percentage, like you almost have to hit basically 5 nines. Like it's extremely good. Building any kind of computer system that hits 5 nines of reliability is absurdly difficult because I believe 5 nines means you get like 1 second of downtime every year.
Right.
So basically 0 downtime.
Right.
And that's
5 nines is 5 minutes of downtime every year.
I thought it was seconds. I
learned that from Cisco.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. No, that got beat into my head when I was consulting.
5 minutes is pretty good. So again, a very small. You get basically one mistake. 5 minutes is like you can't really have. Well, I guess you could have several 1 minute outages, but that's really hard to hit those numbers.
Yeah.
And it's getting close to, not having
Reaching
any downtime. And so the fact that people are actually hitting basically 5 nines of reliability. That's the actual standard that we actually have to be better than 5 nines to say we're safer than human drivers. Yeah, and that's even with all of the drunk driving and the tired driving, which is even worse according to a lot of studies, and all the distractions and all this. We're still hitting 5 nines.
Yeah.
So
I think that kind of ties into like what is it we're actually trying to measure? Because I think of like when Google first had their self-driving car, right? It was driving for like 5 years or something like that before it got into its first accident. And its first accident wasn't even its fault. Somebody did an illegal U-turn and then the car ran into it. So
interesting.
I think if you're measuring in terms of safety, 5 nines, like that's great. I don't think that's what people care about. And the reason why I say that is because people are still worried, well, it's something that I don't know and I don't understand and therefore I'm scared. And then I also see it's something that if I get hit by an Uber, who do I sue? Do I sue the driver? Do I sue the
safety
vehicle
driver.
manufacturer, or do I sue Uber themselves?
I mean, Tesla has been very clear that they're trying to push all the liability onto the driver.
Right.
And Uber, again, it's disgusting, but that's actually the safety driver is there as a legal scapegoat. That is the role.
Right.
And I actually, I was hoping, when I was still running Code Day locally, I was hoping to get one of these talented kids to make a game. Probably couldn't call it that, but I wanted to steal the Mitch Hedberg line and call it "Good luck, fucker." And the idea of the game was to show our legislators, like, if you have no context. So the idea was a racing game where the screen starts blank with a random delay, anywhere from 5 seconds to like 90 seconds of just random delay, just black, and then it just randomly starts, and you have just randomly you're going some speed on some course. Don't hit anything.
Right.
Hence the name, right? And that's really hard, right? You have to then gain context. And there was a great article, I can't remember, it was on Hacker News years ago, about the Coast Guard and about this amazing system that we've built to find people. The U.S. Coast Guard is way better at finding people because they have this massive computer system that tracks all the tides and the wind and everything. And so if you fall over here, it shows probabilities, like they probably floated here or there or here based on, is it just a person? Is it a person in a disabled ship, et cetera? But in that article, they talked about pigeons. And one of the earlier things before they had this system, pigeons are really good, as are many birds, right? They eat seeds. Their little faces right by the ground, and they just peck seeds like hours and hours and hours a day. So they don't get tired. Like doing repetitive visual tasks, the pigeon brain is optimized to do repetitive visual tasks for hours on end without fatigue. But humans, our brain is much more energy intensive. I think it's about 20% of your body's energy budget goes to your brain, which again, you only use 10% of your brain. No, you don't. If you could get rid of 90% of your brain and not burn that much energy, evolution would have done that a long time ago. So we are always looking to save energy and stop wasting that much energy for survival. So humans, like, it's an energy save thing, right? Like, as soon as you don't have to pay attention, you stop paying attention.
Right.
And so safety drivers, this idea, if you know anything about this idea you're going to plop someone in the car, sure, for the first 10 minutes, for the first few days when they don't trust it, right, they're going to be just ready to grab that wheel, right, because they don't trust it. It's,
right.
But
and then
after
a while,
as it drives and it doesn't crash into stuff, they're just going to be sitting there. They're honestly, what's her name? The driver that they charged with Elaine Hertzberger's death. they're like, oh, she wasn't looking at the road. She looked down for like a second. She honestly, from the video I saw, was not doing anything that much different than any other driver that, that just normally has a cell phone in their car. She literally was there as a scapegoat because the car, and it's a damning report. And again, this is older stuff. Hopefully they fix this. But first of all, they're in a Volvo. Was it a V70, S70, whatever it is? It has autonomous braking, which they had disabled so it wouldn't mess with the self-driving stuff. So
I have a cold take on that once you're done.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a knee-jerk reaction.
Okay.
That's kind of why
but yeah, anyway, there were several things where it saw her, it couldn't classify her and all this. There were a number of engineering failures. And what it really comes down to, the gist of these safety drivers, they're not ever going to pay attention. Not with a human. Maybe if you put a pigeon in that seat, maybe that'll work. But they won't have context, right? They're just, what's going on, right? They'll need a few seconds to gain context, which in a plane, if a plane is crashing like Air France 447, and you got a minute or two while you're plummeting toward the earth from 40,000 feet, right? You'll have time to gain context and figure it out, potentially. They didn't. But in a car, you'll have a second, half a second to gain context before you slam into something.
Right.
And so it'll never work. And the human mind, the idea of a safety driver, anyone who knows physiology and psychology, the only thing you get out of a safety driver is a butt in the seat to sue, to deflect liability from the company.
Right. Or you can remove a traffic cone if they put it on top of your head.
That's true. That's true.
If you've ever heard of Waymo, there's been some protests where what people will do, because these are fully autonomous self-driving cars. There's no safety driver. There's nobody in the seat. So they'll just put a traffic cone on the hood of the car, and then it'll start airing out.
Just unicorn.
And somebody has to drive out to take the cone off this car.
We've been laughing because if you've ever been back east, they have Con Ed.
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. So it's their electric company. And so you see these vans that say CONED, coned. You're like, coned.
Oh.
Now it's like, coned.
That's funny. That's pretty funny.
Like, that's what they meant.
Yeah.
It's prophetic.
So the cold take on the Volvo and all that stuff. So when it happened, because I know exactly where they hit the woman. I know what it looked like.
Yeah.
So when it happened, everybody was pointing fingers. Uber was trying to point fingers at the safety driver. Safety driver was trying to point fingers at Uber. Everybody else was trying to point fingers at Uber. They even made it so that Uber was no longer allowed to operate self-driving cars in the state of Arizona. Now they're trying to bring it back.
Yeah.
Actually, no. Now they're in Phoenix.
Yeah, no. I guess Uber's not. Are they allowed to again? Because Waymos are everywhere now, like roaches. Jesus.
No, it was specifically Uber.
Gotcha.
And so it was this whole thing. It was very political, and so everybody's trying to point fingers. Everybody's trying to point the blame. And so you lose a lot of details when that happens. So, yes, the vehicle that they were using, the Volvo, had a number of self-driving safety features installed. That's irrelevant. The reason why that's irrelevant is because those were disabled to use it as a development platform. The Volvo had those features, but more importantly, the platform that the Volvo offered allowed them to integrate new features, and so they had to turn off the old features.
So let me ask, though, like I've always... And you have the background. I can actually ask you this.
Yeah.
So there was a famous case where a nuclear power plant, the only thing that saved their butts and it didn't go into meltdown was because it's a little bit of a thing when that happens. They have multiple safety systems.
Right.
And they had, I think it was a cyber attack, actually. And what saved their butts is there was an analog system that controlled steam pressure and reactor temperature and all this. And so all of the digital systems were completely disabled and just completely offline.
Right.
But it was fine because they had this analog fallback that was like their third or fourth fallback that kept everything running properly. So given that they have this much dumber but more reliable radar-based auto braking built into the Volvo test platform, why is it so critical that that be disabled? Wouldn't you just keep that as a dumb analog
fallback? They had to plug into it.
Okay.
So they had to plug into it. So they had to turn off the old software. They overwrote the software essentially.
Okay.
So you can't have two software systems running on the same hardware.
Gotcha.
Like that.
I didn't realize it was full. I guess that makes sense. It would be software based.
Yeah, yeah. So here's what gets interesting though. Like what actually happened, because they found out what actually happened. What actually happened is that I'm gonna get into a lot of stuff. I'm gonna get into so much trouble. All right.
Where's our legal counsel?
A lot of these, and I'm not gonna say this is specifically what happened to Uber. There's reports along these lines. I can tell you what happened to a similar company in China, so that'll be easier.
Okay.
So a lot of these, and American companies will do this too, these for-profit companies will take open source systems and libraries, stuff that was used for academia, for academic research that targets a very specific focal point, they'll take these things and they'll integrate them into their paid product. So what happened to this Chinese company is they took a Chinese library that was from a university where they had, it was a self-driving library that could identify whether or not there was a pedestrian. And the way they did that was they had a bunch of pictures of people walking in crosswalks. Zebra stripes is what they're called. Now, a person walking in the zebra stripes, that's a pedestrian. A person who is jaywalking, not in zebra stripes.
5 points.
What are they? I have no idea. Let's hit them and find out. We've talked about this before where, and Tesla kind of suffers from this too. You know what a school bus looks like?
Yep.
What does an upside down school bus looks like? You and I.
Looks like a news story.
That's a school bus. Right. But some self-driving cars, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Let's hit it and find out.
Some of the old models did not handle three-dimensional translation at all.
And that's because that's not what they do. They weren't trained to do that. And so from a machine learning perspective, from data science, this is called adversarial training. So we know what correct classification and correct, like, true positives, true negatives are supposed to look like. But what are images that we might come across that we need to train our model in order to be robust, right? One of my favorites is called the summoning circle attack. The summoning circle attack, you take a self-driving car and you draw a big circle in salt that looks like lane lines. So you draw a solid circle, and then on the outside you draw dashes, so it looks like lane lines. So the car, that's white and it's got lane lines, so I can cross, and then it crosses into the circle, but then it sees, that's a solid line, I'm not allowed to cross, and so it gets stuck, so it tries to back up, and it sees the same thing.
Is that true? I heard that was kind of a...
Yeah, no, it's on TechCrunch.
But was it actually...
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's my favorite, it's my favorite self-driving car.
I thought it was amazing, and I heard someone, they're like, no, it's not actually true, though. It just doesn't work. So
yeah. The question is it a transferable attack? Will all self-driving cars fall for it? I don't know.
Gotcha.
But... and it's entirely possible the answer is no, because self-driving cars do use multiple systems, right? They use visual.
Well,
they use visual. They use LiDAR.
Yeah.
They have other forms of object detection. Yeah. And so that's kind of why, like, we shit on Tesla sometimes, because Tesla has this idea of only visual.
Which, sure, humans can drive with only visual, but there's a supercomputer up here. Your brain is heavily evolved and super power efficient. Like, it's not the same thing.
We also have conceptual understanding and context. So, like, is this a paper bag or is this a bowling ball? Like, humans, we can figure that out pretty easily. Like, a visual system, not so much.
It's one of these bad analogies. Humans can do it. Yeah, but we're a long way from human level intelligence.
Right, but there's also a lot of things. Like, my favorite is, you learn this in kindergarten. Like, we have 5 senses, right? Touch, sight, smell, taste, and I don't know, 5.
Did you do hearing?
Yeah, hearing.
There you go.
All right. So we have 5 senses, but that's not completely true, right?
There's like 20.
We have so many more. Sense of internal body temperature, sense of balance,
proprioception.
Right.
Like, where is your hand? Is it touching your nose?
Yeah.
Is it like...
That's why when you're drunk, the cop will ask you, like, can you, like, stick your hand out and touch your nose?
And that's, again, a lot of really good athletes. I have a friend who's ridiculous. We're at his she's much older now, but at her, like, 3rd birthday party, my niece, they gathered one of those little claws that you grip, and he's playing with this thing. He's been touching this for all of 3 seconds?
Yeah, you do it
4
for
seconds?
so long.
And someone throws a wiffle ball at him, and he just catches it.
Yeah.
Right at him with this claw thing. So there are some people that have, like, an absurd, like, their proprioception's at another level, and they tend to be really good athletes, as he is.
Yeah. And so there's so many more senses that we have as human beings. So, like, to limit all the way down to just sight, like, we can tell distance very easily. Like, 2 eyes helps us understand and conceptualize, like, I don't know the scientific name for it, but we can kind of, like, see depth with 2 eyes.
Well, stereoscopic vision.
Yeah, we have stereoscopic vision, and you can give that to a computer, but it doesn't understand, like, distance from stereoscopic vision. So
there's some research, but it's got a ways to go. And then the other thing, like,
why hamper it? Why cut that off? Like, we need to empower. Like, if we're going to use these machines on an everyday life kind of thing, we need to empower these systems and give them the tools that they need in order to make
well, and
proper
why would you
decisions.
constrain it to what a human's limited to, right?
Cost.
If I could,
Yeah.
well, yeah, obviously
Cost.
cost, yeah, obviously Tesla, right?
Yeah.
Cost, but yeah, like it makes way more sense to have sensor fusion and have all these extra data
Right,
sources.
right.
So if there's rain or there's fog or anything else, like, yeah, man, if I could install some radar or if I could learn, have you seen the blind guy? There's 2 of them that teach echolocation.
No.
Oh, dude. If you're committed,
right.
you could learn. Or if you're blind, you should definitely learn. And he's like riding a bicycle. And he's like, there's a certain way he makes a click.
Yeah.
And he can actually see a thing as big as a curb. So he can ride a bicycle. No sight whatsoever. Not legally blind, completely blind. And he could successfully ride a bicycle at like 20 miles an hour. Can't ride a car, obviously, because, the distances are too great and the windshield's in the way. But anyway, there's 2 different guys teaching that. There's little institutes for echolocation. So you can even learn to echolocate, which would be cool as heck.
That'll make me popular at parties.
Too old to play hide and seek anymore, but it'd be a real a-hole thing. Yes.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. So this has been a great discussion. I think that this is a good spot to kind of wrap it up. So we talked about copyright and AI. So things like Midjourney, is that copyrightable? What's going on in the legal space with that? We talked about deepfake scams and how to identify deepfakes and identity. There's a lot of really good discussion on that. We might have to make a whole nother episode just about
Special edition on digital identity.
We talked about misclassifications and self-driving cars, and as more of these algorithms are coming into our daily lives, like how is this going to start to affect us? Definitely, we can make a whole nother episode on that as well. Yeah, it's been a fantastic opportunity to kind of sit down and chat with you. I always like picking your brain. I know we don't always agree on things, but that's kind of where you get the best. Yeah, that's where you get the best information.
But yeah, I mean, the underlying theme on all this is definitely, it is changing things. This is definitely one of the most momentous. It's oversold so much already. I hate to say this, but despite all the limitations for all the different models and stuff, this will definitely force us to make certain changes. It will lead to differences in how we conduct ourselves in the short and long term.
Yes. I have a friend, he has this quote that he says, we failed to bake security into the internet and software development, and we're still learning those lessons and still dealing with the problems today. And now with AI and machine learning and these new technologies that are coming out, we have the opportunity to bake security and safety into these from the ground up. And so what I'm hoping is that we learn the proper lessons and we do that and we integrate,
Let's hope. I mean, the last
I can hope. I can be positive. I can be an optimist sometimes.
The last thing I'll say is that the one lesson I hope we do learn with regard to that is cross-domain problem solving.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Some of these things, when we talk about, generated nude images and all this, I don't think there's a technical solution to that. I think it has to be a societal solution.
Yeah.
You can't throw tech at societal problems and expect it to go well or to fix it.
No.
And we keep trying that, and I think that's where it's going to go poorly. People are going to, we just do this with the tech, and it's like it's a societal problem. You have to solve it where the problem lives.
I need to open an OnlyFans. That's all I heard. I can just make AI-generated OnlyFans. I need to look at the terms of service now. I'm kidding. It's just going to be feet pics. Don't worry about it. Anyways, so if you like this episode, this has been our second episode. We've done a couple recordings ahead of time, not for this episode, but just in general. We're trying to get better at camera presence and coming up with some stuff. So if you like how we did this episode versus our first episode, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to see when we come out with episode 3. So with that, stay safe, stay passionate, and we'll see you next time.
And cut.
Awesome.
Great job, guys. That was awesome.
I'm going to add to that